Well, for the latest, let's speak to United States correspondent Simon Marks, who is outside the South African Embassy in Washington, D.C. Simon, a good evening to you from our side anyway. And I know afternoon still there for you. I can just imagine the sort of murmurs that you're hearing outside of that embassy there. And, of course, conversation around just how much time Ebrahim Rasool actually has to get out of the United States.
Yeah, absolutely, Naledi. He's got until Friday to leave the embassy here on Massachusetts Avenue in Washington, D.C. Forgive the ambulance that's going past at the moment. He's got until Friday to leave this embassy, which is right on the heart of Embassy Row in Washington, D.C. At the moment, it looks like just a perfectly normal day at the South African Embassy. There's a diplomatic car just parked inside the compound. We don't know if Ambassador Rasul is inside the building, but this is a sad day for him and for the bilateral relationship between the United States and South Africa, because this is the day on which he will formally, from the American perspective, become a former ambassador. His diplomatic privileges, his diplomatic immunity are all being cancelled today. As of tonight, he will be a private citizen, and he'll be a private citizen with only permission to remain in the United States until Friday. Our understanding now is, and there's been some confusion about this throughout the day, that he is planning to depart on Friday night from Washington's Dulles Airport, make his way back to Johannesburg, spend Saturday night in Johannesburg, and then head to Cape Town on Sunday. As we know, we heard from President Ramaphosa earlier in the day, he wants a face-to-face meeting with the man who by then will be former Ambassador Ebrahim Rasool to discuss precisely how this crisis erupted and what government might be able to do about determining who should be moving into the embassy here and to the ambassador's residence in the heart of Washington, D.C. There is precedent for ambassadors to be expelled from the United States under President Donald Trump in the past. You go back to the summer of 2019, and the British ambassador to the United States, Kim Darroch, who ironically was working in the British embassy, which is directly on the other side of the street from the South African embassy. He was ordered to depart after a confidential cable was leaked by a right-wing activist in the UK. It revealed that the British ambassador at the time had described the Trump administration as being inept. That didn't go down well with Donald Trump, so that ambassador was asked to leave the country. Yeah. But there's no question this is a day that marks a low point in the bilateral relationship between the United States and South Africa.
Yeah, a low point. I think many people would agree with that, Simon. But then there's the big question around why we've seen this move to expel Rasool, whether it is the utterances that he made at the Mapungubwe Institute, where he talked about supremacism and the like. But then there's also the discussion around, we just showed the tweet by Joel Pollack that speaks about the US consulate here in South Africa. Now, you'd know, Simon, perhaps on your end, you might be getting information on this. The consulate is sitting in an area called Sandton. There's been some discussion back and forth around whether or not that street that the U.S. consulate is sitting on could have its name changed to that of Lola Khalid, who is a pro-Palestinian activist from many, many years ago. I mean, is that part of the why that you might be hearing where you are?
Well, look, I think there's no question that the ambassador's comments to that symposium delivered virtually last Friday ultimately did him in, and he was done in as a result of a piece that was authored by Joel Pollack and appeared on Breitbart News, a right-leaning website supportive of Donald Trump, in which Mr. Pollack accused the ambassador of espousing the view that Donald Trump was a white supremacist, even though Ambassador Rasool never actually used the phrase white supremacy or white supremacist. Nonetheless, that article clearly found purchase with the Secretary of State Marco Rubio and with Donald Trump. The White House has made no secret of its animus towards South Africa's moves at the ICJ against Israel. Mr. Pollack, who of course is not elected or officially a government appointee here, has also in that that tweet from January made it very clear that the issue of the consulate and the naming of the street in Johannesburg is an issue for him, and therefore I think one can surmise that it might become an issue for the Trump administration. But more broadly, the interesting thing about that Joel Pollak tweet from January is that it clearly indicated that as long ago as January the 25th, voices that are influential at the White House and at Marco Rubio's State Department were even positing the idea of a US boycott of the G20 in Johannesburg this November. And that remains one of the big unanswered questions here. Is Donald Trump going to take this so far that he boycotts the G20 that President Ramaphosa is going to be hosting? It's going to require incredibly nimble footwork by whoever succeeds Ambassador Rasul here in this embassy to try and put this relationship back on track by then.
Yeah, and the question, of course, Simon, is who is that going to be? Simon Marks there, a correspondent speaking to us, of course, outside the South African embassy in the US.